We're going to get this started. Actually, before we do that, let me play the horn. So this is the influence of pre-Hispanic culture on Shadow of the Tomb Raider. And who are we? My name is Rob Bridget. I'm the audio director at IDOS Montreal on Shadow.
And I'm Brian De Oliveira, and I'm the composer on Shadow.
Great. And this is just a very quick, brief thing of how we're going to run through it. We're going to give you a quick project introduction, followed by a bit of a deep dive on a lot of the research that we did, and then we're going to talk about some of the execution and integration of the music in the game, and then we're going to try and finish with a bit of a crazy performance involving death whistles and
just have a little bit of fun.
Yeah, we need that. Okay. So Shadow of the Tomb Raider is the final part of Lara's origin reboot trilogy, which started in 2013, Tomb Raider 2013, and in 2015 with Rise of the Tomb Raider, and then 2018, Shadow of the Tomb Raider. And I joined the project team very early on in pre-production, and the few things that we knew that the game was going to be, even in those early days, we knew that it was going to be set in mainly in the sort of Peruvian jungle environments of South America. We also knew that there would be a hidden, forgotten, lost city with a still intact, living, breathing Mayan civilization. And we knew that there were going to be a few Mexican villages and general South American settings. So very, very early on, I knew that I had to find an expert and an authority in South American music. So fortunately, Brian was basically on my doorstep in Montreal, and we were able to meet up in a coffee shop and get excited about the project and start early conversations and be able to bring you in quite early. So, from Brian's point of view, how does it feel to be a composer on a new project like this, a big project?
I kind of felt like her right now.
Yeah, if you can imagine, Brian is Lara.
I think all of you guys have had that feeling as well.
The project is the Jaguar for sure.
Yeah.
Or maybe you saw me as the Jaguar, a little bit.
Pretty.
Okay, yeah. Don't answer that. So I wanted to communicate the audio vision to Brian very quickly. So we had three things that I communicated to him. Firstly, that this was a fictional setting, but it was very much inspired by the authentic elements of the Peruvian Amazon and Mayan culture. The second thing was that this was always going to be from Lara Croft's point of view. So it was always how she felt in these environments, and she's a British archaeologist, adventurer, so we never wanted to 100% take it into the Mayan sort of perspective. So we always kept a bit of that in terms of the arrangements with some of the strings and themes.
Yeah, just get the right balance of instrumentation.
Yeah. And the final thing was that one of our main pillars, in fact, was going to be fear. And in the game we wanted to explore a lot of vertigo and claustrophobia and all these kind of like terrifying environments and situations that the player found themselves in. So we really wanted to exaggerate that and see everything we did through that lens. And then just to dig a bit deeper into what fear kind of meant from an audio point of view, for me, it became this idea of ambiguity. Like if Lara went into a tomb and the player goes into this new environment or the jungle or whatever it is underwater, I felt that by having ambiguous sound, things that you didn't quite feel were music cues, or you weren't quite sure if it was something you were hearing in the space. Was it music? Is it music? Isn't it music? I loved that effect, and it's something I really wanted to explore and push. So fortunately, we got to do tons of that stuff. So in the course of the research, like on my side, I was doing a lot of like trying to get the exact right birds and animals and amphibians and insect sounds for the jungle environments. And so I went into a lot of research and detail about that. But on the music side as well, we knew that we really had to go into the same amount of detail for that stuff.
And that's something that these cultures for me, it's very close to my heart. As a kid, I would fantasize about being with the Aztecs and the Mayans, and what if that world would have existed if these people were still here and the music how it would have kept on going. So it was like, you throw a kid in a candy store. So first thing I did was spend a good few months just really researching, taking the time, calling people in Mexico and Peru, trying to get to the right sources. And when I was ready, I took a plane to Mexico City, landed with 4 empty suitcases, and just started to meet as many people as I could again. I had a few instrument makers that I had already contacted, so they were ready for me. And I showed up there, as you see one picture on the right, this one maker, he basically is one of the experts. There's this whole scene in Mexico, which is amazing because they've, in a sense, have been trying to bring back the old music. As I don't know if you guys know this, but the music was completely decimated and destroyed. So the only thing that's left are actually some of the instruments that they find in these archaeological sites. So I was lucky to be able to take a lot of time and meet these people, listen to a lot of recordings from the archaeologists as well. As you can see in the middle picture, that's actually, I spent about 2 weeks sitting there in the Institute of the National Disc in Mexico. And they had a huge amount of recordings from archaeologists that went into the fields trying to figure out in these little villages if the music might still be close, and also them playing some of the original instruments and figuring out the tonalities and even the tuning. And so, yeah, it's the kind of thing that I just immersed myself completely. And by the end of it's one thing, it was funny, I ended up in this this one village where they only make instruments. And I'd heard about these volcanic rocks, and I was like, okay, I gotta find these rocks. They sound really neat. And I ended up finding them at the edge of this town, and my helper, when she saw me, I freaked out. I was like, "These are the rocks." She's like, "You're crazy," because they were so heavy. So I'm lugging these things, and these people are like, "Pinches piedras." What the hell? You're doing a video game with these rocks? What the hell? And then even at the airport, these porters, they were so sweet. But I'm lugging all these instruments, and somehow I managed to get it into the flight. And I'm going to show you guys a few clippings of some of the key instruments that I ended up using. Yeah. So I ended up with this room full of instruments, and I learned some of the music. I had already internalized it, but I had to go a little bit deeper. So I was actually, at the same time, I was offered an artist residency at this amazing venue. It's actually a dome venue called the SAT in Montreal. It's a system that has 150 different speakers, and you can mix spatially. So I had the crazy idea of bringing one of the main artists that I've met. He's one of the foremost pre-Hispanic musicians. His name is Ramiro Ramirez. And basically for 2 months, we workshopped and performed for almost every night, 4 nights a week in this dome environment. And I basically used it as my rehearsal for what I was going to be doing in Shadow. And also at the same time, it was a chance to see how people were reacting. It was under the guise of creating shamanic experiences. And I'll just play the clip, and you guys are hearing the infamous volcanic rocks again. And the idea was that as I was playing it, there was a dancer. You can't see it really that well on this screen. But her movements, and also myself, we could control where the musical sounds were being, and we were looping it as we were playing it, and then it was being spatialized all around us. And basically, it was like a 1-hour trip out into these shamanic experiences. Yeah, so that was basically like a month straight of rehearsing, actually 2 months, preparation plus the month of performances. And by that time, spending time with Ramiro and just performing every night, these instruments were in me. We had this language. We didn't even have to really think about it. It just, in a sense, we became mediums. I'll go as far as saying that because that was really what the music is about, the spirit of this kind of music. And then we did the village music. And
yeah, so me as a developer, as an audio director, like several of myself and my team went to these performances and were able to just sort of really start absorbing all this this incredible sound world that you'd created. And it became apparent that, you know, the culture, the hidden city that you discover in the game really needed to have that feel and really needed to have that, you know, that music was everywhere and the sound was everywhere, the sound of these instruments. So this was our goal in the city, to, as you walked around, to feel as though you were immersed in this culture and this sound world. So I'll play you a clip of a walkthrough of the city, and you'll hear conch shells, whistles, horns, all that stuff.
Mal y Betty.
Taruca, Milano, sí.
So yeah, I mean, we really like added sounds everywhere. Yeah. Even you see some of the musicians playing, but there's many more pieces of music that are positional that you don't actually see players as well. So it worked really well.
And it was still the idea of creating these ceremonies in a sense. That's how, when I was performing the music, I took that state of mind at least and really try to express it in the playing as well.
Yeah, it worked great for that idea of ambiguity as well.
Yeah.
Again, you weren't sure if it was a score or if it was a sound coming from the world itself.
And this also influenced on how the overall score came to be, actually. I set some very specific limitations. I wanted everything to be as acoustic as possible, so it was all acoustic instruments. Although I perform most of the instruments myself and I do massive multi-tracking, I also really got into the idea of being able to do this on the spot without any forethought, just right with a picture. And the great thing is that Rob would come in actually and sit in on the sessions. And in a sense, he was our spirit guide for the game. And then he would just lead us into where we needed to.
Yeah, so I would arrive at Brian's studio with some footage from the game that we wanted to coverage of. Mm-hmm. Sort of just provide the general shape of it for you, and then you and Ramirez and would improvise the picture. And we have one of the sessions. There.
Yeah, no planning. This is we were even switching, we were doing a lot of polyrhythmical switches and having different time signatures, and it would all just flow. It felt really good actually as we were doing it.
Yeah, you couldn't really tell, but it was one of the Jaguar combat sequences for that clip.
Yeah.
So we already sort of said to Ramiro that, like, imagine you are the Jaguar and you're hunting, and so that was really all the prep that you guys had.
Yeah, and then we just go.
Yeah.
And here's an example of more of a just track by track multi-tracking, and which was also, in a sense, I still had the same state of mind, but it's more how we would normally work, with adding different orchestration, but using the same kind of the instruments that we had gotten in Mexico.
Yeah, so this was a trailer that we did, the announce trailer. So we really wanted the DNA of the game to be the first contact that the players had with the game. So here's the first bit of that.
Yeah, so talking about the approach, so I set very specific limitations. I wanted this to feel as natural as possible. So all my takes, I would do it from the beginning of the cue to the end of the cue, and I wouldn't stop if I could. No editing if possible, or very minimal editing. And because I had all these instruments, I could do massive stacking of instruments, and also spatially record them in the room. I have a pretty amazing big room, so that also just gave me the ability to just not think about what the mix would be. It was on the spot. I basically was mixing on the spot as I was recording. And that also allowed for us to be able to, after the fact, choose whatever elements we wanted to give to Rob.
Yeah, so from that enormous, huge 200 track or whatever session that you recorded, your engineer, Jera, would studiously bounce down all these things to something that I could very easily use. So here's an example of one of those like stem packages. I'll just turn that down so I can talk. So the three top tracks there are all percussion layers. We have sort of low percussion, high percussion, and the third one is like a extra percussion. I don't even know what that is, but it's extra stuff in case I needed it. And this is the stuff that I would, rearrange and be able to implement and iterate on very quickly in the game engine. The purple stuff, this is string layers. So you have some string effects. And the final string layer that's playing, this is cello, yeah? Mm-hmm. Or bass.
Both,
cello
actually.
and bass. Okay. And then the really interesting stuff for me, as as the sound design side of things, were these two red tracks, which are the effect stems. So death whistles, horns, all this kind of stuff. So this got me really excited as a sound. So I'm like, this I have to put this somehow in the game itself, like in the sound world. Again, going along with that trying to get ambiguity into the game and for the player to feel fear. So these sorts of sounds, I wanted those in 3D. So it was really just a simple case of editing those out, creating wise objects, random containers and things like that, and then having that implemented in 3D in the game environments. So I'll just play you a few examples of some of that stuff. So this is one of the tomb entrances where we took conch shell sound layers and added that. So those worked really amazingly well as like a really confusing sound, because you've just come into this cave from a ocean storm, and some people were saying thought they were hearing ship horns, like a shipwreck was going on and stuff like this. So it was like everyone brought something different to it from their imagination, even though it was an unfamiliar sound. Yeah. Which was working perfectly. So we also did the similar thing with some other sounds as well. We brought in the 2013 Tomb Raider, the Jason Graves had a sculptor make a thing called the Instrument, and so we wanted to bring that back and use that as a sound design element as well. So we used it for this resonant sound in the bells. And so it was influenced by the stuff that we were hearing, but it was a different sound. So again, another way of using a musical texture and tone as a sound effect in the world. And then the final clip I'll play here is, again, Brian would do these really sort of like spooky sort of breath sounds and breath layers.
Yeah, it can sound really creepy when I want to.
And so I soloed that and I was like, okay, this is definitely going into the tombs as well. So this is that. Definitely a more subtle example, but something that really brought a lot to the table in terms of fear. And by the end of the project, that idea of ambiguous sound being sort of this fear pillar, this idea had really expanded way beyond what I thought it could be. So, at the music end of the spectrum, we had all this sort of this diegetic music in the tomb spaces, non-diegetic music which is becoming diegetic, and then at the other end of the spectrum we had all the musicians were playing actual music in the environments as well as source music.
Yeah, but because of this approach and having spent so much time doing this and with the back and forths, that also influenced how I would perform the instruments, and yeah, it was a two-way street.
Yeah, so you'd end up giving me many more of the
Yeah.
layers of stuff that we could use in the soundscape.
I would envision, oh yeah, Rob is going to really use this one. It's like, yeah, let's do a few more extra tidbits.
Yeah, it was almost, yeah, I was totally spoilt for choice. So just summarize some of the main takeaways from our experience. We really wanted this game to sort of have its own identity and its own unique feel. And through the research into this culture, we were easily able to get that happening.
Yeah.
And just to have that.
And important thing for me was not to be culturally appropriating. So I spent the time and made sure that we were being as true and accurate as possible. That was very important for me.
Yeah, and one of the sort of interesting things I think you brought back from your trip was this idea that music and sound were all really just one idea, one concept.
Yeah, it's interesting because in pre-Hispanic cultures, they really don't call music as we see music. It was, in a sense, a soundtrack or a sounds for daily life. It would be to accompany certain actions or to emulate nature and bring about the energy of the spirits. So it's a very different state of mind. And I would even argue that, in a sense, like they were sort of the original sound designers back then. So
yeah, and the final point here is just that idea of very close collaboration and influence. Just the overall score felt so much more integrated into the game world itself, and I guess influenced by the game world. So that was really cool. That it wasn't a traditional non-diegetic score that lived in this space outside the world. It was really part of the game world itself. Yeah. So that was really valuable. So now we get onto our sort of finale, don't we, Brian?
Yeah. I gave some of you out there some of the death whistles that we used in Shadows. So we're gonna just do a very rough version of what I would do normally to picture, and we're gonna have some fun. But a big reason I wanted to do this was just for you guys to feel how it actually, sonically feels in a room when we have things happening in a space. So we're just gonna play, and you guys can just play along, and might direct it a little bit. It's just a quick minute clip, but let's have some fun.
That was amazing. Thanks. So we actually do have some time for questions. We always time this. Obviously, the adrenaline's kicked in, so we did it a bit shorter. So we have like 3-4 minutes for questions if there's anything. If not, we can all just go off and do more death whistles. But.
I'll just stand right here. So I'm curious, coming from Western music, you had these sort of like notions of rhythms and scales and sort of tonality and what harmony sort of means. And then now that you're sort of getting this pre-Columbian sort of notion of music or sound or somewhere in the middle, how did that change sort of your opinion of like what makes a chord or what makes a scale? Or because I noticed that like a lot of instruments were actually multiphonic, right? You had this sort of trio on one side and some sort of flute, or they were sort of combining.
Yeah.
How did that change your viewpoint?
So I'm actually obsessed with tonality and scales. I actually have taught myself how to hear microtones. But So I actually had to like undo all that work that I did and really get into the state of mind. Like I think for them, they were looking at frequencies and notes almost as what we would do, like use binaural beats for, in the sense of having, when you have two close tones, you get that wavering and it was more of an emulation of nature. So I just kind of had to let go. I was lucky I had the real representation of the instruments and then let the instruments speak for themselves.
And and I guess I thought there was also quite a big layer of what traditional sort of strings and things like that, which these instruments seem to sit really nicely with that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why that was, or if that was they weren't in tune with the stuff, but it was resonant for sure. Yeah. But I don't know why that happened.
It was all just part of the process.
It was magical.
Yeah.
It was a magical thing.
Hi, thanks for the awesome talk. When you were combining diegetic and non-diegetic music, are you syncing the emitters to the non-diegetic layers, or do you bother with sync, or does it matter?
No, we deliberately stayed away from any sort of sync idea. So it's very aleatoric, randomized thing. So all the sounds that I'd used from Brian's stems were this sort of shape, so that they would begin and come in and peak and then fade away, so that whatever was happening musically, it didn't really fight with that, or it wasn't triggered, it wasn't generated by that. So, and again, it's cool because in a situation where there's no score underneath it, it is just a very random, organic sounding element. So it's sort of just, it was easier that way, and it worked better as well. So
awesome, thanks.
Yeah.
This is an amazing talk. So from composition standpoint, how often do you get to do that sort of traveling and really getting to know a culture and immersing yourself in the location to gather those materials and bring them back? How often are you able to do that? And is it your call, or is it more of the studio that you're working for? And have you done that before? Is that is that your process?
Whenever I can, if we have the time, I will try to go to these places and try to absorb as much as possible. And it's not just about getting the instruments and just, for me, it's also just spending time with the people and absorbing the culture and just feeling the general vibe. And that's what I will use for my inspiration when I get back and I'm in the production process.
And I heavily relied on someone like Brian going to these places so that I didn't have to go to these places. Because Brian, you're there, you're part of that world. Yeah. I show up and I'm just gonna see my hotel room and be terrified, I think.
Yeah, so. I think I can say I'm very lucky to be working with Rob and his team. They were super encouraging. They're like, we want to hear more of the jungle. When that time you spent the shaman, that's the feeling that you should be.
Yeah, and we even got Brian to take a Sony D100, D50 to record Walla for us as well in some of the Mexican scene early in the game. That's all stuff you just recorded for us.
I nearly got jumped though.
Oh yeah, yeah. So
that was fun though.
So you had a role a bit as a sound recordist as well. So yeah, it was incredibly valuable to do that kind of trip. I think for the entire team.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great, thank you.
Hello, I'm a professor of international music at a university. I teach music from literally every country in the world in some sort of broad sense. And one thing I found particularly difficult about teaching in South America was that since there's, the Andes are very much real, and the people who used to live in them, they are very separated from each other because crossing mountains is very difficult 1,000 years ago. And it produces a lot of different kinds of traditional music in different places. So I was wondering how you dealt with that, how you maybe dealt with, maybe there's too much information just because there's so many different branches of traditional music and not necessarily all of them sort of linked together.
I'm pretty lucky actually because I did spend a lot of time in Peru, both studying and I had already a huge collection of instruments. So I didn't really have to go back to Peru. That was already built into me. And in a sense, I was making the music specific to the location. So I was able to very accurately at least use the right instruments for the right areas.
And another interesting thing is, the fictional version of that world in the game could essentially be anything we wanted it to be. Like in Paititi, the hidden city, we sort of conceived of it very early on as an Incan sort of civilization that survived, and then that became Mayan influenced as well, and even Aztecs. And so we had a whole backstory about who was involved in that city and why it survived. It's not in the game, but it's something we invented to allow us to be creative and to sort of come up with something that sounded very unique as well.
Yeah, actually, for me, it was like, how would this music sound like if they'd actually stayed there hidden all these hundreds of years?
Yeah.
What would it sound like?
Because it would have evolved, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it would have changed. And that's why if you hear some of it in the soundtrack, you hear a lot of complex polyrhythmic rhythms in there, and that's one of the theses that I had, that it would be evolving in this sense.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi. So how much of what you were doing was based on sort of specific traditional music or specific recordings and rhythms you'd heard and people had researched and you'd found, versus just sort of trying to absorb all of it and synthesize completely new, improvised stuff? How much of it was influenced maybe specific recordings or songs or things that were known to be done in the past?
So for the Andean or Peruvian music, it was, like I'd mentioned, it had already internalized since I was a little kid. So that came pretty easily. It's all been reinterpreted in a sense. I didn't actually play any specific melodies. I wanted it to really feel like as if they'd been completely, since they were kind of sense-separate and not been part of this world, I approached it as if it was exactly that. But there's a lot of the patterns, a lot of rhythms I had learned. Because I rehearsed it, it just became part of the language. And sitting with Ramiro, I realized that that's what they did as well. I mean, they're improvising, and naturally, because of the way some of these instruments are made, you're going to do these kinds of patterns and rhythms.
Yeah, I think that SAT performance was very critical in getting to that point as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it's more of creating these waves of sounds, these atmospheres. That's the important thing. It's a feeling, really. Like when even one of the shamans that I met, they wouldn't think about notes. They would just come up with melodies and go with a feeling in the moment. And that's how I approach making the music.
Great. So it looks like we're all done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.